Hey y'all, I'm Colin. This is Life of Logos. I have been going through what I would only consider a crisis of faith. And not in the way that you would probably think. I'm not the person who's like, oh, I was a Christian once, and now I'm not. This is the beginning of things, and I'm moving away from my faith. No, actually, quite the opposite. I'm moving into it through the other side. If you would imagine Christianity as if it is a lake. I think that's a great way of doing it. It's a lake. And for the most time, and for the most of us, we're very comfortable swimming at the top of the lake. We are in a situation where we can enjoy it. It's convenient. We can feel the sun on our faces. If you want to be a little bit risque, you might dip below the water a little bit and come out on the other side and back to where everything is good. Unfortunately, there will be times when it rains, and it's not super comfortable to be in the lake. Sometimes the waters run a little bit dry, and you are not able to enjoy the lake in the same way that it was. Because maybe it's marshy, maybe there's weeds in it, maybe there's parts you don't like. But you stay in the lake, metaphorically speaking. There are a number of people who decide to get out of the lake. Maybe they don't like the way the water feels. Maybe they don't like the climate that it creates. Maybe there's something about the water holding them that feels oppressive, or like it's holding them back from their freedom. Maybe it doesn't let them breathe. But occasionally, and this is where I am, a person decides to dive in, to see how deep into the faith that they can go. So deep into the water, they get past the point where it's easier to go up, and it seems like the water is actually pulling you down. And then all of a sudden, you find something. You find yourself somewhere else that you did not understand before. Or perhaps you're on the other side. Somehow swam through the blue hole and have come out on the other side of this lake and seeing it in a whole new light. And you look around and it is less crowded than you expected. In fact, that it's almost empty. Very few people are there to be able to converse with or commune with and be able to understand the things that you now understand after diving so deep and coming to the conclusions that don't even make sense, but somehow are perfectly clear. And it's almost as if everything that you had ever known when you were swimming on the surface of the water is completely different and the same all at once. That was a shockingly good metaphor for how I feel. I just came up with that as I'm recording this, so I'm gonna give myself a pat on the shoulder. Anyway, that's how I feel with my faith right now. That's how I feel. I grew up in the church. My dad wanted to be a pastor, so he's got a degree in divinity, as does my mom. So we were very religious growing up. Always in church, we read the Bible together as a family. I grew up, naturally, I went to the Air Force Academy, and if you don't know, the Air Force Academy is an extremely conservative institution, which should go without saying because it is a military academy. But the church and excuse me, excuse me, the church and the Air Force Academy is actually very strong. Or at least when I was there, it was very strong. It was almost as if we spent more time praying, reading the Bible, and doing Bible studies or attending some sort of gathering of faith than we actually did at school, working out, or doing military things. There was a large stretch during that time in which we would go to church on Sunday, we'd have Spire on Monday, we'd have either a Bible study or a gospel choir on Tuesday. Wednesday, we would have another group meeting. I think we had ours called God Chasers. Thursday, we might take a break. Friday, we would go to this thing called The Well. Saturday, you catch up on your homework. And Sunday, you repeat. It was all church, all the time. And I felt at that time that I was really doing well. I was doing the right thing. I was belonging in the church. I was outspoken. I was a person who at the time loved to lead worship. I was one who knew the Bible verses cold. All of these things. And I was also well known in doing so. And then I graduated. And I went to pilot training. and everything changed. I realized that while I was at the academy, my mind was so geared on the right answer: be a Christian, go to the military, be a general, serve your country. All of these things that were so right that when I went to pilot training and hated it, I realized that some of those foundational things, these objectives that I had built my life on and set my trajectory on, were not things that I actually believed in. But I held on to that faith. The military hoorah enthusiasm had faded, but I still had my faith. And I still had a lot of my fervor for my country. And I say that in past tense, and I'll explain why in a moment. I moved out, came out to California, and I was going through then also a bit of a crisis because I had to rediscover myself in a way that made sense when confronted with just an element of my own authenticity. I had always wanted to be a superhero, and part of me still does, though I much prefer naps now. And then I wanted to be super strong, and that didn't work out. I wanted to be super fast, kind of short, so that didn't work out super well. So I wanted to fly, but then flying didn't work out. So I thought to myself, let me sharpen my mind then. Let me read, let me learn. And I grew in learning. There was a point for the first few years I was out here outside of pilot training. I was putting down 50, 60 books a year, just reading voraciously. And in reading voraciously, I really got to experience through other people's eyes the problem of suffering. For my life, honestly, I grew up kind of cush, not gonna lie. In hindsight, it was a nice life. Grew up in Texas. Both my parents are still together. They provided for us, though they worked extremely hard to do so. But they loved each other. I had a family that I can go back to. I had a free education from the Air Force Academy. I had a solid job with status and guaranteed income and all of these things. And that was cool. And I was seeing suffering outside of myself through someone else's eyes for the first time. And I had to confront the question of what is the purpose of suffering and evil? And while many people are very quick to be able to highlight the potential absences of God, is or are very few people who will argue for the absence of pain and evil. And the problem that I have with pain and evil is this, is that if I were to go fix pain and evil, I would have to administer justice to those who are doing evil. And putting that a little bit more succinctly, if a person is a killer, then I am justified to execute justice in killing that person. However, in doing so, then you also become the killer. By executing the justice in this is a radical example, of course, with killing, but in doing so, you have then become the thing that you tried to destroy, thus leaving us in an endless cycle of destruction and evil. And the only answer to that would be that the person who is willing to do good has to voluntarily confront the evil and meet it with good. Which led me back to the Christ, specifically Jesus, who saw that we were in sin and in our own destructive nature, and chose to take the fall in the sin while meeting it with good so that we could live. That was, at the time, I thought profound, and I see now that that was only the beginning of what that would be, because I didn't understand the depth of the suffering that must be endured on the behalf of the person that is evil. I didn't understand how much suffering was actually there, the depth of the pain and the agony that is expressed in that suffering, that question of suffering, and how we don't deserve it. Some time went on, and again, I was back swimming on the surface of the water and just thinking about things. And if I'm being perfectly candid, all politics aside, I feel like in my adult life, we've seen the degradation of the systems that we have established that we can have faith in. That was a long way of saying the systems that we had believed in and were faithful for so long, the media, the church, the education system, the government, all of that ended up being outrageously corrupt. Outrageously corrupt. And not only was it outrageously corrupt, but it is corrupt and self corrupting. It's like a self destructive cycle. And that's where I think my vision of my country lost its shine. As I had, at that point, believed that America was this grand, shining beacon of hope of the goodness of what humanity could be. And though, in some ways, it still has the opportunity to be that amazing place, we're going backwards in a lot of ways. And that's just being objective. That's my opinion. Shoot me for it. Don't actually shoot me for it because I see how y'all have actually been killing people. But that's my opinion. I think we're taking some steps back. I think what we've seen with whether they are true or not, the rampant sexual allegations of our leadership. That's political and in the church and in the media. It's everywhere. Everybody's doing some weird stuff to children. That's very strange. It's not cool. And what I'm coming to terms with is many of those people who have done these outlandishly destructive and evil things are oftentimes the same people who are touting Christianity. And I would defend them to some degree because doesn't it make sense that we have all of these faithful things? We have all these moments of faith and there's sinful people. Well, Paul was a sinner and this person was a sinner and Jesus redeemed them. Those we should give more grace and more grace and more grace. And I still believe that to some degree. But there's more to the story. I came to the end of my Air Force career. And then that was when reality set in. Because I had stepped outside of the world where all of your bills are paid, you have a job, you have job security, everything's going to be great. And to a world where actually you got to go fend for yourself now. There's no more big blue blanket that's protecting you. You're out of the military. Think for yourself. Fight for yourself. You don't eat what you don't kill. You have to go get it. And I took some time to reflect, and I brought a lot of these Christian values that had been taught to me into my business. Kindness, patience, leadership, overt grace, sometimes over the top grace, being willing to listen when people were wrong. And I tried to lead my team with that. And it failed. Because the people who I was leading took advantage of it. Point blank, period. And that doesn't necessarily mean they didn't try their best. And a lot of times they did try their best. But I was too busy on trying to be nice, trying to be liked, trying to be good, trying to be graceful, trying to be everyone's friend. This shining image of what Christ would be. I forgot to actually do the hard thing. And sometimes the hard thing is telling people you sucked today. You got to do better. You got to figure this thing out. Maybe you don't actually have a place on this team. You can't take everybody with you. And a lot of these values that I held as Christian values were truthfully just being soft. You're just being soft. You're being the Christian that they wanted you to be, and that person was soft. They're a pushover. They're too nice, and they're not effective. They need to be able to get some stuff done. You got to grow up at some point. Grow a backbone. Quit being so daggum nice. And you got to tell people the truth sometimes. We are great to hear sheep herding Jesus. But sometimes you need old school, open up the earth and swallow person, God. And I realized that I had tied that belief all the way back to that point at the Air Force Academy. When I was in the church so often. To all those times I was listening to God. or praying to God and studying the Word, being the good Christian from a very young age, all the way up till really recently when the bottom fell out. And I took a second to step back and reevaluate. Who exactly was Jesus? That was the cracking when I realized I was being too nice. I had to step back and really reevaluate some stuff because he's not a pushover. Nice is not a fruit of the Spirit. It's not. Kindness is, patience, long suffering, all that goodness. That's all in there. That's a valid point. However, he was the guy flipping tables, calling out the religious elite, talking about everything that was going on, and all of a sudden it clicked. It clicked in a way that I didn't understand before. That the God I had been praying to up until that point was the God who delivers you from your pain. Which is interesting because unfortunately, Christianity and the way that it is written for the West is oftentimes easy to manipulate into exceptionalism. God, he showed up, he was on earth, he came only for this group of people, and he did all these miracles so these people weren't suffering anymore, but he wasn't here for everybody. I'm not here for you, but even the dogs eat the crumbs from the master's table. Wait a minute. Just wait a minute. Have we used Christianity to say that we're exceptional all of a sudden? Now we can't be held accountable to the mass atrocities that we are committing? Here's a wild thought, even more wild thought, that perhaps we decided to exchange truth for belonging. So all of a sudden we looked up and we're like, well, the Bible actually says this, but if I held myself to the standard of what the Bible says and actually act like Jesus did, then I'll be an outcast. And I don't want to be an outcast, so it would be better for me to just conform to the ways of the masses, which is slowly drifting to hell all of the time, as opposed to standing up for who Christ was, all the while the actual Christ, who was the Messiah, who walked on the earth, didn't have a home, he didn't have any money, he had a couple of friends and a lot of enemies, and we're sitting here afraid to be outcasts? We're afraid to tell the truth? We're afraid to love radically. We're afraid to stand up and resist the forces that are being put on us. We're afraid to stand against totalitarianism. We're afraid to stand against capitalism. Because all of the while, if you stand up and actually live how Christ lived, you would be in trouble for it. Furthermore, if we actually took what was written in the Bible about Jesus for what is actually written in the Bible, everybody in this whole society would have to turn around and do things different. If you took Jesus for who Jesus said he is, all of us need to take one serious step back and be like, we are so far off the reservation right now. The same Jesus who came down and talked about people's concern with money more than he talked about heaven and hell. He talked about the kingdom of God a lot, but he also talked about people's addiction to money a lot. And here we are in the most capitalist society that the world has ever seen, all the while touting the glory of God. That is a contradiction. Does anyone else see it but me? And then they're going to come and be like, oh, so you're one of those people that thinks Jesus was a communist. No, I don't. Because communism is fundamentally based in control by the government. But Jesus is also against control of the government. It's for freedom that Christ sets you free. That's Galatians 5:1. So he can't be a capitalist because he says, do not bow down to money. A man cannot serve God and money. Give to Caesar what is Caesar's and give to God what is God's. And he's always setting us free. He's not communist. He's not capitalist. The truth of it is, the government shall be upon his shoulders. And everything will be made new. And God is love. And you can't be like, oh, I'm the person who believes that God is love, but I hate everybody else who doesn't look like me. I believe that God is love, and I give to the church, but all those guys over there, they need to get out. I believe that God is love. And I read a Bible that also says, show kindness to the foreigner and the traveler, all the while I'm trying to put my walls up. You're in contradiction. And then we're going to talk so much about sin, when sin means to literally miss the mark from archery, and we are not even aiming at our target anymore. I see why people are frustrated with the church. I see why people are frustrated with Christians. I see why everything is in disarray in our society. I see why it feels like evil is closing in at every turn that you see, because they are. And this is not even from the Bible, this is a quote from Andor. The death of truth is the ultimate victory of evil. That is a fact. Because we don't even know which way to look. I was thinking about this the other day. As a part of the Bible, where Jesus is telling a parable, the kingdom of heaven is like a vineyard, and the master of the vineyard hired out workers to work his fields while he was away. And he sent his servants to the vineyard, and they treated one shamefully, they hurt another, they killed a third. And he said to them, surely I will send my son, and they will honor him. And the people who are working in the field said, this is the heir, let us kill him that we may take the inheritance. And I've heard that story in the Bible 1,000 times, and we all knew that that story was about Jesus. He's the son that they killed. And I didn't realize until yesterday that they killed Jesus. Which has two things in mind. First, you can't be the Christian who's praying to avoid the hard thing. So they kill Jesus. Because the God you're praying to is not the God that avoids pain. He's the God that sees you through pain and takes you to even better places after the pain. Just as after he died, he rose again and then ascended to heaven. 1. 2. What if that didn't literally mean Jesus the way we interpret Jesus? What if the world was the people in the vineyard? And as I say that, I know everybody who hears this is going to be like, yeah, of course, they're the people in the vineyard. Stand by. God is the owner of the field. He sends his people, those are the prophets, to go minister to these people in the field. And then they take the son, who is Jesus, and they kill him. And we take that to mean they hung him on the tree. But that's not, I don't know that that's what that means. I think for the first time, what that means is they took his truth. They took his message. And they killed him. They hung him on a tree for everyone to see. In the same way, the world has taken Jesus and hung him somewhere for everyone to see. This is God. Look what he did for you. He died for you. But we have him. And we wear him on these crosses, all the while ignoring his teaching because they killed the son in the vineyard. Which makes me think, what would it actually mean if he came back? And this is some trippy third level stuff. I know as soon as it's received, they're going to be like, well, he came back. But that's not the point I'm getting at. The understanding of who he is. That's what we're talking about. They killed the understanding of who Christ is. They killed the image of who Christ was. They killed the message that he's trying to say. That is what they killed. And they hung him on a tree that we all could see him, the body without the spirit, on the tree. So the world can look at this man who was Jesus and see the body of who he was, but not experience the spirit of who he is. Because they killed him. And they paraded his body. Just as the church killed his message. They killed his teaching. They killed his values. They killed his spirit and paraded his body. Because if you kill the spirit of Christ, hypothetically, you can't kill the spirit of Christ, but if you kill the spirit of his teaching and parade his body, then you can justify creating mass atrocities in the name of the body that you still have. And that's what it feels like the church is doing. That's what it feels like the society is doing. It feels like we are parading this image of God, all the while the Spirit of God is not there. That's what I'm getting at. And that is such a meta thought because it's not perfectly clear. He sent his son and they killed him. They took his body and they said to the masses, look, we are the ones with God. And we have his dead body. But the soul has been missing for generations. And if the soul has been missing for generations, he is Christ. He comes back. The soul comes back at some point in the story. Think about that for a second. The soul, the spirit, that is Jesus, then returns to earth and fixes everything. And we had been sitting around waiting for him to come back on the white horse with the tongue sticking out of his mouth, drenched in the blood of his enemies. All the while, have we really been thinking about who Jesus is? Have we? Putting this in a different way, because I realize this is a long video at this point. We've talked on this channel about the Jungian understanding of Jesus. The Jungian understanding of spirits. Spirits being the shared phenomenon, desire, values, and behaviors of a group of people on earth. I.e., the spirit of greed is the shared values, behaviors, and desires to have money at the cost of people. That is the spirit of greed. Now, what is the spirit of Jesus? To love your neighbor? To be a good Samaritan? To heal those who are hurting? To take care of the blind? To be with orphans and widows in their distress? To call out that which is evil, even if it means your own life? To speak the truth at all costs? To be kind to those less fortunate than you? To not be taken away by the temptations of bread, of money, of power, of any of these things, but to simply love God with all your heart, mind, body, soul, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. Is that not the spirit of Jesus? And how long have we been walking around with his body on a tree, touting God, the Savior, is with us, when our spirits are far from him? I would ask that the spirit of Jesus return to this earth, that would live in me, that would live in you, and that would live in all who are so bold as to say that they want to experience God as he is. Because God is not one who can be held to the United States. He is not one that can be held even within the walls of his own church. Otherwise, the veil would not have been torn. He is greater than our understanding. He's greater than the things that we've been taught. He's greater than all of these false prophets and deceivers who have used his name and body in vain to gain power, to gain wealth, and to dominate those who are on this planet. He, the Spirit of Jesus Christ, the Messiah, is here to set the captives free. And in his own words, I am with you until the end of the age. And in his own words, the kingdom of heaven is upon you. And even as I say this to you now, I say it with a fair amount of fear in my own heart, because that will change everything. But if nothing else, that is a reason for hope. I'm Colin. This is Life of Logos, and we'll talk to you next time.